Let's talk a little bit about facts and knowledge. Why don't we, Lewis? Last week or the week before, I talked about President Obama's statement that the deficit had fallen faster during his administration than during any other term in the last 60 years in the United States. PolitiFact examined that claim and verified it to be true. Now, this is a totally separate issue, as I mentioned last time we talked about this, from whether it is factually better if the deficit is lower or higher and what effect that has on the economy. It's just more of a point of reference as to what is true and what talking points are accurate or not accurate. Well, we now actually have a poll about whether most Americans even understand or realize that the deficit is falling. And not surprisingly, Lewis, at least I wasn't surprised, Americans seem to have no idea what's going on with the deficit, do they?
No, as with as with most issues that are important and pressing.
You have to be armed with facts and data, especially if you're going to be having political conversations with right-wingers who often simply repeat talking points that aren't based in reality. And I actually recently had a conversation with someone who just kind of threw someone else that I know saying, hey, they're a Republican and they're a Republican because of what Obama has done to the deficit, of course, implying that it had gone up and implying that a higher deficit is factually worse for the economy than a lower deficit. And we got into the conversation, and it really led to a conversation that supported this new poll from the NBC Wall Street Journal. So back in 2009, there was an NBC Wall Street Journal poll, and it said that 8 out of 10 Americans said they were concerned about the federal deficit and the growing national debt. So clearly it's an issue of importance to voters. The good news is that, as I mentioned, deficits have been falling significantly. In fact, they dropped more during President Obama's term than any other presidential term over the last 60 years. The problem is nobody knows about it. There's a recent Google consumer survey, and it said, how do you think the U.S. federal government's yearly budget deficit has changed since January of 2010. They had 665 responses from around the country, wide range of demographics, and the results were 41% of respondents think that the deficit has increased a lot since January of 2010. 14% think that the deficit has increased a little, and 25% think that the deficit has stayed the same. Only 20% of respondents knew that or said that they believe the deficit had decreased a little or a lot. So, Lewis, 80%, according to this study, are just flat wrong when it comes to the direction of the deficit. And at the same time, 80% believe that the deficit is very, very important to measuring the economy of the country. This is a huge uphill battle when it comes to misinformation if it's an issue that so many people find important and are completely uninformed about.
Yeah, you have to assume that when it's 80%, you have to assume that just about every mainstream media outlet is completely failing to get this information across to people.
Right. So the question then becomes, where are people getting this information? Is it from corporate media? Remember, Lewis, we don't use the term mainstream anymore because there is nothing mainstream about corporate media. Is it coming from print media? Is it just coming from water cooler type conversations that are stemming from false premises and spreading like a virus? I don't really know the answer. But at least now, when you talk to people about the deficit, before having the conversation, which is really the more important one, about what does a change in the deficit mean about the economy, you can actually inform people about the change in the deficit. And that's at least a starting point for accuracy, if nothing else.